bit, and then we'll see.
Mr. Brunner has asked the question, where do we find in the Torah the concept of the... And I have quoted a posik in my posik K. No, this is not in the top page. Watch my statutes, as mishpotai, asher, and my ordinance dom. If a person does them, v'chai bohem, he will live with them. And he had a Shem. Now Rashi says v'chai bohem, and Rashi, if you look at the second to last line and the first column, v'chai bohem, olam habo, in the world to come, if a person does the Ratzon Hashem and olam hazeh, he will inherit the world to come. Shim tomar olam hazeh, if you think that this is referring to olam hazeh, halo sofa who makes, isn't the end that a person dies? Even the greatest tzaddik, you go and see, he's a great tzaddikim. Chaim was a tzaddik gomer, right? He, after living tzaddik almost 100 years, he did eventually die, and the other tzaddikim as well. So the fact is, when the posik tells you that this is going to be, God does not go and lie. He tells the truth, and this means that this is a proof that there is such a concept of olam habo. As it says Adam, if a man does it, doesn't even refer to a Jew necessarily. It could be even a goy. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says this in Aveda Zarah, right on top of the page. You live with that. It says there's like this. Asher Yasser Asam El Adam. Halamanatu. Here we learn how to feel Ovid Chavim, Osik Torah, even Ovid Chavim, a goy. And he learns Torah, Noah only, and not the other, because the other areas he's got Mitzvah on, he's got commandment on it, therefore he's not obligated, and he really shouldn't be learning Torah. Okay? Another area.
Is there a pasuk that directly talks about all about? These are both these psukim we are looking at.
Well, obviously, you must understand something. Whatever the goyim or those that are going away, God forbid, because it's the way they should, consider our Torah, we are required, according to our Torah, to learn it in light of the oral law. We cannot learn it.
Him that do everything literally according to the
We
way
don't
it's-
learn. The goyim learn
it literally.
They learn literally. That's
So one of our commentators from 900 years ago says differently.
But he's quoting it out of a Gemara. He's not saying it on his own.
Rashi says
yeah.
Well, because that's talking even earlier. It's still talking that a
No,
man.
Torah is written in the Lashon Bnei Adam. We quote human beings as making this statement. It doesn't mean to imply to us that human being is the... Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Rabbi Shmuel gives the 13 principles of how to interpret in accordance with the certain principles of Kal V'chomer, Gezer Shava, and these other things. When you interpret the Torah, this is the way you interpret it. Now, we every day in the morning, and this is considered, and it's quoted from, I think, Sifri. It's part of Sifri. That doesn't mean that Rabbi Shmuel was the author of these 13 principles of interpreting. As a matter of fact, I'll give you, we have a Goan Olam in our own generation, Rabbi Chaim Zimmerman, who he says in the Sefer Torah and Mitzvahs, that Torah and Reason, whatever the name of the Sefer is, that he says that this is a B'd'Oraisa. This is the Oraisa concept, that we have these 13 principles of interpretation. The mere fact that we claim to it does not mean to imply that he was the author of it. In the same fashion, when you learn Gemara says this, or Hillel says this, it doesn't mean to imply he was the originator of that concept. He just taught that concept together with all other concepts. You understand that? Is that understandable? Right,
Oh no, I understood from the beginning about that.
Understand.
But I'm saying that
We cannot interpret any posik.
because they're always going to be skeptical about that.
Unfortunately, they'll have to remain skeptical. We cannot go on and tear out the neshama Torah because somebody is skeptical. Without learning the Gemara, you cannot possibly understand what the Torah is talking about. Impossible. It's impossible in any way to understand. This is the division between Torah, true Judaism, and all these other illegitimate manifestations of our generation. This conservative reform, reconstructionists, all these are man-made manifestations because 200 years ago they didn't exist. You can't say it was given us on Mount Sinai when 200 years ago. It's a man-made concept. It's not Torah that God gave us. It's not the Jewish religion that God gave us. And anybody that pretends that it is self-deluding himself or fooling somebody else, whatever it is, a fraud, and it's not to be accepted seriously. All right? Any other question? Now let's go back to the Medrash.
I want to ask a
Yes.
question often in mind.
Yes. For Rodate, the person is trying to kill you.
When you're trying to kill you, you're permitted to protect yourself. It's an advantage when you have it, because if you allow the enemy to regroup and everything, you're just making trouble for yourself, because it's gonna. That's very nice, and it's very good to be that way, that you should fight on Shabbos. But unfortunately, we're not living in that type of a society. I think if the other side would go and be decent, we wouldn't have to fight the war in the first place. If terrorists would not be shooting and killing innocent civilians, they'd be there in the first place. So the world has a very funny way of looking at things. If Jewish blood is spilling, that's all right, no problem.
What?
Jewish blood is spilling, that's no right, no problem at all. We tried to go and stop the Jewish blood from spilling, then that's some kind of an omelet. I don't pursue that. I don't buy that kind of philosophy. All right, fine. All right, let's go back to the.
How does a person get around eating tray food?
This is a problem, because here I have a society that's supposed to be free, and therefore not a dictatorship. And there are questions involved there. If it's in an area where you have access to kosher meals, obviously you're not permitted to eat treifa meals. Again, if you're...
Based on the last World War II, those Orthodox Jewish boys that got into the army, were drafted and whatnot, they became, in the majority of them, chaplain's assistants. Now the chaplain could have been a Goy or a Jew. He was ordained by a seminary, and he was a commissioned officer. However, buck privates and whatnot, the average Orthodox Jew that was recruited in and wasn't of any high rank, by him going to the chaplain, whether it was Jew or Goy, it made no difference. And many of the chaplains were not Orthodox. They could have been Reform or Conservative. Nevertheless, they permitted and had a respect for the Orthodox Jew, and they gave to the commanding officer over the whole thing to say, this particular person leave off from duty on Shabbos. That's one thing. Second thing, they arranged with the Jewish Welfare Board that frozen kosher meat or frozen was brought in, and the Orthodox Jew who was a buck private had the utensils. He was permitted to go into the kitchen and cook his own meals. So that's in the case where you're in training or you're on on maneuvers even. You can't get out of maneuvers, but when you go to the front line, that you're in the actual shooting trenches, you take what food you can with you, but then I think they give a heter to eat what the government provides, because you're in a sakana, you're in a condition that you can't prepare kosher food for yourself. So what I'm saying is that was in World War II, and I think it continued beyond. But I know of people that basically that were recruited, they became chaplain's assistants, and they had an easier life than the average recruit, and they were able to keep kosher and Shabbos and everything, although they had to cook their own meals.
That's an exception to the rule. How many could become chaplain's assistant? How many did?
They
I'm
did.
talking about guys that were in a forward area where there was no
It's
support.
different. When you get to the front line, all that's wiped
I was
out.
on an island.
But the chaplain assistants were never sent to the front line.
There was no.
This is Parsha Tzadik Beis, the first chapter of Tzadik Beis. Zandri said, there's no such concept as a human being in Olam Hazeh that does not have troubles and tribulations. And before you came, Seymour, I said the corollary of that is very simple. It means that God loves every human being. Because as we know as adults, when a parent gives admonition and punishment to a child, it means that the parent loves the child.
For the betterment of the child. And we, trying to approach this in an adult fashion, will understand that since God gives everybody Yisurim, He wants for their betterment. The Yisurim is supposed to go and operate and do something good for them. Now, there's many ways in which the Yisurim operate. This we're going to study. We're going to learn this now. But first I'll read you the text. Ashra v'la'odam, happy is the man, ki Yisurim boim v'alav min haTorah. That the Yisurim that he has come to him from the Torah.
Now we're going to know what that means. We're going to learn what that means. In other words, if you have to have you, if you can have your others, your choice, and if the
best
students
guy.
can come because you are engaged in learning Torah, this is the most best way of getting you Surim. You understand?
Surim while learning Torah?
Well, we'll explain that.
All right, all right.
Proportion will explain that. This is, you see, since everybody gets Yisurim, so nobody gets a free ride. People may think they're getting a free ride, but they're not getting a free ride. Either they think they're getting a free ride and then their health breaks down, so they got Yisurim that way. Or they got some other source. Whatever it is, everybody gets it. So if you can in some way maneuver yourself so that you get Yisurim through the fact that you're learning Torah, this is considered the highest form of beneficial Yisurim you get. First of all, the first thing that comes to mind is very simple. You're learning Torah, you're acquiring spiritual merit, right? Yeah. So right away, that's something well worthwhile. And if you have Yisurim during this time, the spiritual values are still accumulating. It's not depreciating your spiritual values. They're getting higher and higher. Yeah, because we have that. Sarah Agra, the last mission in the 5th period in Pirkei Avos says, says, according to the pain the person has in fulfilling a commandment of God, that's the reward that he receives. And the Tesis Yontif says, a person gets a reward for doing the commandment, and he also gets an extra reward for how hard he had to work. So obviously, if you have to work harder, you get a bigger reward. See, God is very fair. He not only rewards a person for the actual thing he does, how hard they have to work to do it. Some people, it's easier to do a mitzvah, so they don't get such a big reward for the efforts. Just for doing the rewards for the mitzvah, but also for the extra effort you have to put in.
Can I ask a question there?
Yes.
On this concept, a person gets, say, a day before Yom Kippur. He has all the intentions of fasting and everything highly in every respect the way it should be. And the day before Yom Kippur, he comes down with a very serious, which prevents him then from fasting and doing everything that he intended to do. How is this illness benefiting this person?
Wait.
This is a Yitzur.
Wait, let's first learn this. Could you hold up? We'll first learn what you have here, then if you ask the question again, perhaps we can. You should learn from his Torah. Now the Pasuk, there it says, happy is the man that God gives Yisurim to, and he learns God's Torah. Here it says that it comes from him through learning of Torah. This is a different emphasis on that. A person that has troubles and tribulations that nullifies him from the opportunity to learn Torah, these are really the Yisurim, troubles and tribulations that are really of a punishment nature, actually admonition nature, that God is trying to purify this person through suffering for something that he has not done properly. When learning Torah, they are, it says the Yisurim of love. Actually, the Gemara says, so this is the Yisurim usually.
Rabbi, isn't the same allegory true? That the reason the reason your mother or your father punishes you is not only because they love you, but because so you won't do that same thing again.
Yeah, they're trying to keep you from making the same mistakes.
God is punishing you for not, so you won't do the same avera again.
Yeah.
And also God's punishing you because He loves you and He doesn't want you to sin anymore. He doesn't want you to quit to do that sin.
You know, every time God punishes anybody, He always operates in the punishment to elevate his person, neshama. To elevate his person. The punishment is a form of elevation of the neshama. You hear what I'm saying? The punishment is a form of elevation of the neshama. In other words, or purification of the neshama. God never punishes just to punish. The punishment is a way of eliminating improper things that a person has acquired, or improper things that a person has been associated with. And this is to separate it from these improper things. So the punishment is intended as a cure of what he has unfortunately sunk into. But that's one way of a punishment. Another way of a punishment is where a punishment is temper the person to become a better person. Now it's not necessarily to eradicate anything that he has done incorrectly. It's intended to make him capable of doing even a higher form of avodas Hashem. In other words, if a person can be influenced by God's kindness of giving him these trials and tribulations to bring him up to a higher spiritual state, this is a tremendous work, because now a person's capacity to serve God magnifies to a tremendous degree, where he can serve God on a much higher plane and thereby earn much higher merits than if a person would be allowed to plod along on a very low plane of serving of God. Do you follow me? So this is a Yishurim Shel Avo. In other words, when God gives a person that is basically a righteous type troubles, but the troubles are not such that he is not able to live with them, this is considered a Yishurim Shel Avo usually. There be exceptions to that, but ordinarily, in that circumstances, this person becomes a better person by virtue of these stresses placed on it. Just like your temper steel, you make it stronger and stronger. It's able to do more in the areas that it can accomplish things. Now this is Meforshim and trying to tell us, you are a beautiful form. I'll read it to you. I'll try to translate some of the concepts involved. The Dorish Masker pole, here it mentions when the Tzaddik is in the skies, and he said you have to bring down your brother Binyamin. And so now God, Yaakov is blessing his children, and he says, may God have mercy on you, Shaddai. God Almighty, we translate it. Shaddai means sufficient. In other words, all the tzores that I've had up to now, the tzores that worrying about, and Yosef and Shimon, and all these tzores now, all this should be enough. Shaddai, sufficient. Let God not punish me anymore, give me any more stress in this area. It's sufficient. Let it be sufficient. Let it not be any more. God, in His mercy, decide that this should be sufficient. In other words, his stress felt that this is as far as he could go in the case of Yisuri. Never said that. Never said to God, that's enough. Whatever God was ready to dish out, he was ready to accept. And he was prepared. Doesn't mean Chalil L'chas that Yaakov was a different personality. Of course, Yaakov had much more tzores than Avraham Avinu, number one. But I'm not saying what Avraham Avinu went through tremendous Yisurim also. No problem there. I'm not trying to diminish in any way anyone, but different personalities. The Gemara talks about brochas. There's certain individuals, great they say they were having Yisurim, and so another great tzaddik comes to them and he says to him, he says, no, I don't want them. I don't want them. I want the reward. But they realize that when you have Yisurim, you get reward if you can stand up to it. You understand? So a great tzaddik can either take it or leave it. Some people that are unfortunately are not tzaddikim, they got to take what's dished out to them because it's coming to them, because God's got to clear away the tzores that they made for themselves. But a tzaddik is not in that position. He's not to be punished or cleared up, because he can, in effect, to a degree, influence God's decision in this area. If he says to himself, to God, I don't choose to be further at this point, then God will stop at this point. It depends what a person is prepared to do. You see, it's a question of, some people are capable, like Avraham Avinu, whatever God prepared to dish out to them.
He used the word Shaddai,
Yeah,
which is a name for God saying...
Shaddai, why do you mention here Shaddai? Yisuri, the one that says to Yisuri, die, it's enough.
Yeah.
I'm asking, Ashrei HaGever, happy is the man. Happy is the man, according that his Torah are there. Every human being is destined to have troubles. Yisuri. Don't think that anybody is excluded from that. Ashrei Misha, Amol of the Torah. Happy is the one that his troubles, this is the best way to have troubles.
His troubles are...
In learning all of Mina Torah.
Happy is the person that Yisurim come to him from Torah. That he has Yisurim that are new. That God has on each individual. He names that because he did not anything else for reason why that the Yisurim should come on him. It only means to forgive him and to give him more schusim of avo. Yisurim sha'avo, it means to temper the person, to make him a better person, a greater. And when you have greater potential, you can accomplish much more in a shorter time than a person that's just plodding along on a lower level. It's tavo, and it doesn't refer to a person that has Yisurim because of his nature, a cripple or a blind person or sick. It doesn't have too much reward as where a person is actively being given Yisurim other than physical. Yisurim also gets reward for that too. It's a method of also paying, clearing the decks. Maskim as Baaleim, Kulashim name. They're all new. Again, you have pain and tooth in the eye. The Maskim is talking about pain here through as Avono. Oh wait, so the words here are not.
Maybe this one's better.
Perish Allah Gavato. The Yisurim going on this person alone. And not because Yisurim come from the government or anything, but even personally, it affects this person personally. This is the Yisurim Shel Avo, because this God is giving him personal attention. And then it goes on to say, it's possible that Yisurim Shel Avo, sometimes they're really not, because you have to investigate your past performance and see perhaps you may be Yisurim that really wipe away some of the sins that involved here.
But I still didn't get to the point of understanding Yisurim in Torah or not in Torah.
Well, you see this, if a person has troubles and tribulations, and he's able to function and still learn,
Yeah.
this is Yisurim.
Okay.
It does not affect his acquiring new schusim. It is a tempering that process whereby he becomes higher and higher in spiritual contact. It says like by Abraham, Yisurim came in such a way that he could bear it. It was not overwhelmed. And as a result of that, he was able to, the tzaddik gomer, and all the Gemara talk about tzaddikim, everyone there, and he was in a position where he could say to God, that will be enough, just like Yaakov. That's why he said, I don't want any more. I don't want them, nor I want their schar, the reward. Because they appreciate it. The reward is there if you can withstand it. But some people can and cannot. It depends on the individual. I don't diminish in any way Yaakov. Samuel gave me a book on Tales Hasid. Point right there. It says by where he has a choice if he wants. Pasuk in Mishnah. Because God loves you, He gives you Yisurim. He gives you the Chacham. In His love of human beings, gives them trials and tribulations, intending thereby to make them of a higher spiritual nature. If a person is capable of enduring them and still functioning as a righteous person should function, he earns tremendous gifts of higher and higher spiritual value. If a person can take them, and matter of fact, most tzaddikim do that. As a matter of course, they are prepared to undergo tremendous trials and tribulations, to work for a portion of the world to come, and they're prepared to forego the temporary pleasures of Olam Hazeh in order to do it. And this is the pattern. It comes to each and every individual. Every one of us has Yisurim. There's not one of us that is exempt. We have Yisurim Shalava if we are great enough tzaddikim. We are supposed to consider ourselves Beinonim. It doesn't mean that God considers us Beinonim. He may consider us tzaddikim. But when we approach it, we're supposed to consider ourselves. But it's got nothing to do with God's decision. God can, and Allah does, consider all of us tzaddikim. Why not?
Can we consider other people?
No, everybody's Beinonim. We cannot make a judgment because one is in a position to make a judgment.
No, don't we say that?
This is after you're dead. You can make a judgment. But I'm only a human being. I'm not God.
Oh, so we can't consider other people.
Oh, there's no Easter involved in having a higher estimation of a person.
Yeah, you can have a high opinion of people. That's not wrong with that.
Even if
But
it's
don't
erroneous.
cut it. It's just a few.
And even if it's erroneous, you can have it. I mean, there's no Easter involved. Sinus Chinam is an Easter. Abbas Chinam is no Easter. You can love everybody. Otherwise you do. Why shouldn't you? Otherwise it should be. It should be that everybody should be. He wasn't trying to. So it's Roy to be. We're Roy to be We're going to have the Shekhinah Ruach. As a matter of fact, we're learning.
And he sees something in his dream, and it comes true. That's
Not necessarily. There are different forms of communication. Sometimes a person, as a person gets more and more involved in, God opens up to him ideas and concepts that were hidden to him prior to that time, even when he's asleep.
While sleeping can get an answer to a...
Yeah, it can happen. A lot of times a person can go and fall asleep, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he can dream an answer to what he...
Yeah, except for emotions, everything that was said to them came in.
That's been like this. But there are different gradations here. God gives a good idea in your mind. Couple, you can think out something that's from God. Everything, the fact is that every person here is subject to, from time to time, God gives them good ideas in the couple. And the more you learn, God gives you more and more nice ideas how to do that a little better.
When I write songs, feel they got an inspiration.
Whatever you classify.
They don't know, they got
You
something.
got to give credit where credit is the concepts to every person
Songwriter.
to the degree that they expose themselves to proper influence.
Never heard of Irving?
All right, any more questions about this particular mimer?
I'm still not clear on it. I'm sorry to tell you. What does it mean, Yisurim in Torah or Yisurim out of Torah?
You can have Yisurim in many ways.
A person wants to learn Torah and he's kept away from learning Torah because he's ill or something. That's not
a Yisurim Shalom. If it's a person can function.
Well, if a person has to go to hospital or has an operation,
Well,
he
that
can't
is
do
not-
anything. Now, what is
A Yisurim Shalom
in which it's affecting Torah? That I don't understand.
A Yisurim
Sweating, he can't figure out what it's saying in the Torah. He's sweating. He's trying to understand it, and that's
that could be considered a Yisurim, still learning. He's trying to. That's Yisurim, but actually the Yisurim is where he's not forced to stop learning.
He's not forced to stop learning.
Once you're
I'm
forced
still
to
confused.
stop learning,
So how could the person have
He has a bad headache, but he's still able to.
he has a bad headache? He has something bothering him, but he's still learning.
you're still learning.
Yeah, he may not be learning as good as
good.
normally.
Yeah, trials and tribulations, yes. The Gemara talks about if you don't babatul from davening. If you don't have Yisurim that keep you from davening.
Yeah, like sometimes your mind is somewhere else and you're saying the words, but you don't remember that you said them.
I read those the 1 hour of Yisurim.
Oh yeah, I remember 1 hour. He asked for 1 hour of Yisurim. I read the same. I don't remember where I read it.
That was
Recently. Yeah, he only asked for 1 hour, and during that hour he decided to daven mincha, because during mincha the Torah and what his mind was on that he did.
So it's a question of the attitude of the recipient of the Yisurim. If the person can withstand them, of course he gets tremendous spiritual elevation. And this is what's required. Yisurim are not intended as a blind punishment. It's intended to do something good for this person. Either build up his chusim, or as a kapora for something he did that he shouldn't have done, or as a method of tempering him to make him a better person. It could be Yisurim. It could be. Not necessarily, but it could be. If you are able to function and still Yisurim, that's a sign that's Yisurim Shabbat. And if you can also bear the Yisurim, sometimes you can't bear it. If you can also bear it, then you are getting higher and higher spiritual merit. I wouldn't pretend to know. But there are different individuals that affects it in a different way. Some people can handle it in a better way. Bali Neder, Sunday, we will continue what the Moshe Rabbeinu now is going to take the Torah that the angels had agreed he should have.
He's entitled to.
And now
bring
he's
it
going to go
down.
and try to take it down to earth and try to complain about it. We'll learn that in our show. That we'll learn later. No, I'll continue here with this medrash. Now we've mentioned before about this medrash on Tzaddik Beis, in the first parsha Tzaddik Beis in the medrash Rabbo, Rashis Rabbo, and the medrash is talking about where. So he comes out in the end. He comes to he reanalyzes and says there's 5 different types of people that have different types of Yisurim. I think that might be something that...
1 or 2 of them are applicable to us.
Whatever it is. First of all, it says the first type is the type where a person has Yisurim because God wants to test him. like tzaddik, there it comes as a test. In other words, a type of tempering process whereby a righteous type, a person that really doesn't deserve to be any punishment, but it's a method of which God elevates that spiritual capacity of the righteous type.
But the duration of the what's the singular for a Yitzurim is what?
Well,
The difficulty or...
yeah, whatever you want to call it.
All right, sometimes the duration lasts for years,
Yeah.
and sometimes it could be something that lasts for a week or a month or a day.
That's right.
So how does one, why should one have to put up for so long with the same Yitzurim?
You said, well, in the case here, for instance,
Where's the years?
it was like, for instance, worship idols.
right.
So, and they ended up with a Kiddush Yitzchak where he had
Yeah,
to
yeah.
offer his son.
I remember that.
This was a relatively short period of time, in the sense that
How short? Did it last about 20, 30, 40 years? From the Kibshin Aish to
No,
Kiddush
no.
Yitzchak?
Each individual
That period of time, he had different, they were
different
trials.
10 top
10
trials,
trials.
and last much longer
It's
than
the
others.
same.
But there's a difference in intensity. Obviously, when you are called upon to sacrifice your only, I couldn't imagine a more. It doesn't compare to where you're asked to sacrifice your own life to exercise your children. That goes against every concept of Judaism. So the first type of there is an individual, usually a
Purpose is
tzaddik.
for a test.
It's a test to temper him and to make him a better person.
Okay.
Now that test, that happens to every individual that aspires to become a tzaddik, a righteous. In other words, you have to go through a series of tests. The Medrash says in another place that God does not test a Rosha very overly because he's already flunked the test that he's been given, and he's in no position to take any other tests, and nothing to test. All right, so the first one is a type that, like Abraham. Then the second one, Nebuch, is a person that because of his physical nature or anything, he has a weakness of some kind. This is sometimes a long duration, sometimes a short. But that, of course, is also something that it's not necessarily because the person deserved it in the sense that he did something bad to deserve it. It's a method in which God tests this person. Now, some people manage to rise over tremendous obstacles and become tremendous people who do things. This is Moshe Rabbi. He couldn't talk very well, and yet he was supposed to be a leader of a whole nation. He was supposed to communicate with them and everything, and communicate with the paramount and everything. And the whole thing is a test of a person. Sometimes a person can rise above his test as things are not. But even in the area where he can't rise above it, the fact that he is undergoing such a test indicates that it will give him credit for those tests, and he will not be given in any way. Then we have a third type of individual that talks about where you have that the test is if it's happy the person, say for instance, Rabbi Alexandri says, it's happy if the person has this test, not in a physical ailment or something, or a diminishing of some kind of thing, but the test is in his Torah learning. This test involves the Torah. Well, what this implies, we will learn from a different Meforish, the grandson of the Mamral called Perish here. And so he says that, and then in the third test is a Yisurim Shel Avo. He puts it in a different classification, also that it's just in order to increase a person's rewards. In order to increase the rewards that God's going to give him, God gives him additional tests to build up his spiritual worthiness. This is not necessarily to build up his stature of spirituality, like the first test, but just to give him additional merits that he can earn extra credits, if you will, and build this up. And this Yisurim Shel Avo, God, in other words, is trying to make such a person that's receiving Yisurim Shel Avo much greater in spiritual stature and getting tremendous reward for it. And when is it considered a Yisurim Shel Avo? If he doesn't nullify him from learning Torah at the same time, he's getting these extra stresses. And this is, of course, because if, God forbid, he's nullifying from learning Torah during this time, he's losing out because he can't learn Torah. So what good is if he gets reward on one side, losing out on the other side? So it doesn't make sense that it's like a person is being paid a lot of money, but he's got to pay out a lot of money, so he ends up with nothing. So it doesn't make sense. And then the fourth type of an individual is a test that to remove any sinning that the person may have done. And this is a means of cleansing, if you will, the neshama. This happens to a lot of people, unfortunately, that have made mistakes in great quantities, that they are from time to time inflicted with tests. This is a bracha from God, because this is sort of cleaning them off from all their solace, all their imperfections, and making it clean again, their neshama. Some of these things occur in Olam Hazeh. For those that are basically, they get their cleansing process in Olam Hazeh, and it usually happens. Unfortunately, if some people have to wait until they go to Gehenna, to hell, to have the cleansing process occur, it's a little harder to take. But in Olam Hazeh, there is that cleansing process. And then finally, there's a test, not because of the person's, any individual personal test that we're testing this person. It's a test because this person is such a great righteous type that this person is in effect like a shield against the whole punishment that would come on that generation of mankind. And this person, in effect, is a great tzaddik, the Yisurim that came on Yechezkel, the prophet. Or like we say, also that will occur in Melech Moshiach, not because of their own individual lacking in any way, be tzaddikim gemurim, but that it's a question of protecting the generation that has unfortunately done a lot of things they shouldn't have done. These 5 different types of individuals are being tested. Now, in regards to another Mephosh here, the one that the Rabbi Prague's grandson, he says like this: what does it mean that you don't go out to a person from Torah? It means like this, that first of all, what do you mean when you learn Torah? You learn to, happy is the one that learns Torah, to learn how to accept the Yisurim without having a chip on your shoulder and objecting to it. Now this is a very...
Acceptance of the Yisurim.
You accept the Yisurim without being critical to God and say, why does God send this upon me? If you can come to that maturity of thought to appreciate the fact that the Yisurim are coming by fiat of God's divine will, and if you can learn enough Torah to understand, that these Yisurim are a necessary part of your life in Olam Hazeh, and these Yisurim are given on you by God in order for your good in one way or another, and you cannot resent it. This is a tremendous madrega. If you can come to the point where you don't resent the Yisurim that
You're
God
not
sent
bitter. You don't carry a chip on your shoulder.
You don't carry.
You got trouble.
You know you got trouble, and you do. For
And
the
you know about it.
Mike that was left here, we were
Yeah.
describing there are 5 different types of individuals according to your parish that you see Yisurim. First, there's the type that God is giving him a test after test in order to temper him, to lift him to a higher and higher spiritual madrega. And then there is a type of individual, unfortunately, has some kind of deficiency, natural deficiency of kind. That's a test too. And that area, in the area, learn, you're welcome. You asked the question about whether or not a person should be punished.
Yeah.
You were talking. What's your question again?
It's written, is not,
Oh, to the
that
third
God
generation.
remembers the person up to the 3rd generation and
But the good things.
And the 4th generation of those that hate him.
and remembers the goodness up to
Right. That's all right. At any rate, the concept is there. You must understand that the Rabbi Nishim, the tzaddik of the world, the Rabbi Nishim never does anything that's improper in any way. Rabbi Nishim punishes a person is because this person needs this punishment. Nothing vindictive about in here. Rabbi Nishim never punishes a person that is not deserving of punishment. If a person had a father that was a very wicked Russian, so the Treffin like it, and this individual person is a tzaddik, the righteous type, God forbid that we should consider that God would punish this person for the sin of his father. God forbid. One person does not get punished for the sin of another. There are an exception to that. There is an exception. When a person is not yet bar mitzvah, and at that point, the sins of the parents can cause them to have premature death. God forbid, or some other thing. But this is basically a punishment on the parents, because, of course, any such neshama, any such person is cut off at such a tender age, before they are actually responsible for their actions, are certainly going to go to the highest of heavens. No shy about it, because they didn't do anything personally to deserve any such punishment. When we talk about the fact that God punishes to the third or fourth generation, Chazal tell us that only refers to a case when the children follow the wicked example of their parents. Obviously, they are not being punished because of their parents' wickedness. Unfortunately, they are also being punished for their own wickedness. Obviously, it aggravates it.
Well, then why do they have to
If they do,
well, why do they have to say that?
you must understand something. When you read the Chumash, or you read any part of Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, you must understand that you're only touching the tip of the iceberg. You ever see a figuration of an iceberg that's floating in the ocean? You have a tremendous mountain of snow and ice above the surface of the water.
Maybe
Now, if you would
20
look,
feet high.
if you had the capacity to look underneath the surface of water, you
It
would
goes
find
down maybe
you would
100.
find a tremendous volume of ice and water that ice and
Still
water submerged that you can't observe to. In other words, it's much bigger. In order to understand any of the psukim of Torah Shebeksav, the written law, which means the Tanakh, Torah Nevi'im Kesurim, which some people call the Old Testament, you have to look into Chazal, into the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, Talmud, and the related literature. This explains what that means. Therefore, when I explain to you what it means, I'm not just going and taking the posik literally and saying that's what it means, because that's not what it was intended to mean. It was always intended to be interpreted in accordance with Chazal, according to the Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is the basic concept, one of the basic concepts of Judaism. And unfortunately, many people miss this concept, and as a result, they assume that they can take a pasuk out of its context and just read it literally, and thereby implying that's what it's supposed to mean. Nothing of the kind. It was never intended to be taken literally, sometimes not. Depends on where it's found and what it's saying. And like for instance, the concept of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The Talmud never intended that to mean, to be, if God forbid a person accidentally pokes out somebody's eye, that you poke out his eye. God forbid. It just meant as a measure of monetary damages. The way we have nowadays in American jurisprudence, if you want to sue another person for, God forbid, of causing an accident where you lost an eye, you sue him for how much diminution and pain and suffering you've had, diminution in your value and everything of that nature in monetary terms. And that was intended by the Talmud. That's what it was intended. It was never intended to be taken literally. And yet the Romans had a Latin phrase, lex talionis, they made a whole big deal out of something that never existed. It was never intended, an eye for an eye, people. They made it literally. You understand? And this is an improper understanding of the, and this occurs from time to time in many areas where people try to do it in this way. As a result, if say somebody comes to you, it's not of traditional Jewish faith. If he's a non-Jew, you just tell him very simply, our Torah does not just consist of the Tanakh, it also consists of the Talmudic literature. If you will accept the Talmudic literature explanation, then I can discuss with you what this means and what this does. Otherwise, we're not in the same thing. You don't accept it, and I will not let it go. And the same token, all these Johnny-come-lately phenomena that call themselves Jews, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionists, or what have you, all are man-made manifestations of what their conception of what Judaism should be. They discard in more or less measure the Talmudic explanation of the law, and they're following the same path that the early Christians followed. And therefore, they're no more legitimate Jews than the only reason they're Jews is because of a fact of birth, that they are descendants, and it's still a relatively recent phenomenon in our time and age, because the first of them came up only after the 1800s. So it's only less than 200 years that these phenomena came up. So to pretend that these are the Torah's motion, this is the Torah from God, from Moses, and the law of God is ridiculous. It's a fraud, and it should be described as such, illegitimate, and certainly not legitimate exercise of Judaism. To answer your question?
Understand?
No, you didn't get to the point that the third and fourth generations.
Third and fourth generations,
Means
that's-
that if they continue
They
in the
continue
same
this
way
way,
as their
Yeah,
four,
and we'll continue up to that point to go and give.
The other way would.
that
will
for
it be
goodness, they're
rewarded?
rewarded.
Yes, God is, thanks God, very generous.
Okay, but why?
And He's prepared to reward us not only for what we do or don't do, but reward us for what we didn't do or didn't do. If we have spiritual merits, not because of our own activity, but because of the activity of our ancestors. Or sometimes it works the other way around. We get spiritual merits, sometimes the activity of those that we have, our children, or in this case, I'm teaching you Torah. If you become, I'll get a little residual benefit from that, because then we'll say, and because if you can influence anybody to do a mitzvah, you also get credit for that. And so God is very generous. And I'm not complaining. The system is wonderful. I just want to get it out. No problem. I'm not complaining. His generosity extends beyond our comprehension. Even the smallest things that we do, He makes a big deal out of it and gives us tremendous reward, much more than a human mind would imagine it merits to be given.
So you're saying the reward goes both ways. One would be the parent be.
Yeah,
Good.
that's wonderful. Yeah, I like that. I like it very much. I think it's beautiful. It shows the kindness of God that He figures out ways in which to give us more reward. Again, I'm not complaining. It's a beautiful concept. On the other hand, God is not going to punish you if, God forbid, something happened that was direct against His will and that you had no hand in doing it. And that's perfectly fair. I think it's very fair indeed.
Innocent, so you're not going to be.
The parents try.
Not necessarily.
Parents, you have good parents, and you have sometimes never children that don't follow the paths of the parents. For instance, our foremother was certainly Tzaddik, no child, and yet their son was all right, was half and half, and the other is from the case of, unfortunately, Esau came from. But it's not that they didn't want to teach him the right thing. It just the mere fact that the person is exposed to proper influences does not